Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
In this conversation with Ms. Vijayashree, who's the CTO of Shikshalokam and also a director of Onlineengineer, she talks about her career trajectory and how she approaches technical challenges. Some of the key points that she shared are about how she accidentally ended up in computer science and after she wanted to study electronics engineering, and how the transition from a services role to a product role to focus on some of the technical aspects and becoming an architect. She also acknowledges the need for analysis and design, but also emphasizes that the importance of getting things into production quickly using agile approaches. And what are the factors that she weighs when making decisions about adopting new technologies. And of course, the importance of communicating non-functional requirements to her team and how that is integrated into the design process. We then talk about her transition from working in the commercial sector to the social sector and any associated challenges that she sees. So she shares some tips on designing solutions for the social sector and what could be some of the metrics for success for such solutions. And finally, she talks about some career tips for people considering contributing to the social sector. Listen on. Hi Vijayashree, welcome to the Software People Stories.
Hello, Shuguru. Thank you so much for inviting me for this session. It's really an honor to be part of this.
Oh, we always love to have stories of people like you who've been there, done a lot of things, which act as inspiration for our listeners. But before we get to all that, we can start with your origin story. How did you get to be associated with IT? And then what has been your career trajectory? And then we'll take it from there.
When I was doing my college, when I got into the 11th and 12th, I was always a science person. Science always interested me, given that my family has also always been on the education side, academics and administrators. So education was always on the forefront for us. Never was for me as a girl. Education was foremost, and career was not an option. It had to be. You had to stand on your feet and go through. And equal opportunity was given, whether it's a boy or a girl in the family, and that's how it came. So when I was making my choices, actually, so something in science was always I wanted to do. Those days, it was all about basic sciences. Chemistry was I was very interested in chemistry and math and physics. Then as I got exposed to the other opportunities, electronics engineering kind of caught my attention. Medical was also an option. In fact, my father wanted me to be a doctor, but somehow though I was very good at biology and it came very easy to me, but somehow I couldn't look at myself as a doctor. So I said, electronics and problem solving logic was always something which interested, because I've always been anything to do with problem solving. I love to do. I could sit and do math for hours together. Oh. So that's how I started off. Mm-hmm. And the interest came in. Funny part was we did well. I went for my placement for the seat for engineering, and I had chosen electronics. But they offered me computer science. In those days, it was the DT, Directorate of Technical Education in Bangalore. Mm-hmm. So they said that, in fact, he was the one who said, please do computer science. It's a new field which is good for girls. So okay. That's how I was actually hesitant. I said, no, I want electronics. But he advised me, no, you take this. It's good. You will like it. So I said, fine. And I took that, and that was a choice I accepted it, and I got into engineering, NIE. That was where I was given a seat, and I started, and that's how it all started off. And then it was no looking back. It just went with the flow, and I enjoyed every part of it. I enjoyed the studies, and it was something. It was natural for me. That's how I got into it.
And in your career also, you've been more on the what we may call as the system software side, right?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Yeah. In fact, after my engineering, I was all set to do my master's, and I wanted to get into hardcore technical MTech. I was supposed to give my GATE exam. Unfortunately, I met with an accident and I was bedridden for 3 months. So the whole thing changed. In the meantime, I got an offer into TCS. So I joined that. Somehow, all the time, I always wanted to be on the tech side. Though I started off, in the progression, how it happens those days, I did some courses all in IISc towards system programming, parallel programming, all of those courses because that interested me a lot. Designing, coding, product designing as architecture has always been my passion. I have to get into the details. So that's how, even when I was in TCS, I wanted to be involved at the lowest level and to what the design is. When, how it grows in these companies in India, you get into the management role. And after 7.5, 8 years in my career, when I was growing into the management role, I took a very conscious decision to say, no, I'm going to be on the tech side more. And that's when I made a switch into a product company. I said, I'll stay with architecture as an architect. A techno-managerial role is what I grew into. But always consciously, I made an attempt to be in the technical side on foot there. Plus, obviously, when you're there, the people management, other things come into picture. But I still continue to do that. And that's what interests me.
So 2 questions. No, one, ultimately, we are all creating solutions, which means that the appreciation and understanding of what the problems you're trying to solve, and also from a user's perspective, versus when you focus more on, say, the nuts and bolts of how you build things. How are you able to bridge the two or balance the two?
Fantastic question. Actually, when I started with services industry. As I said, I was part of TCS, and that's where we used to do projects. And I can share couple of my experiences there. So, you go in as a young person and saying, I want to code this, code that. I want to do this technically this way. So a couple of projects when I was at the junior most level, I would focus around doing technically what is good. I would say I'm just lucky, just plain lucky. I got into some of the best projects that were there. In fact, I trained in Chennai on mainframes. Those days it was all of mainframes. But then I took a conscious decision to come onto client server. So moved to Bangalore office. So I started with, because I had learned Unix, and that's when C was coming up. And it was most of self-studies and learning. It interested me a lot to sit down and code on Unix, learn the internals, do all of that stuff. So when the project started coming in the initial years, I was focusing only on how to do the best program that can come in terms of the code quality, what reuse I can do of the code, all of those aspects which were there. I mean, in those days, it was at a different level you used to code, in fact, right? Everything had to be written. But then as I moved up, well, and within 2 to 3 years kind of stuff, you start interacting with end users, and you take a role into not just as a programmer, you're moving into the design and actually essentially basically doing the analysis and what is needed by the end user. So my interactions when end users started, that's when I felt the need to do a balance between what you can do technology-wise, the best, plus the user interaction. In fact, for every vertical that I started, every solutions, because initially I was associated in developing for the credit card systems and then in the financials. So I used to get into the details of what these applications mean? What is the, what does it require? The whole business understanding there. And then I actually started to work on what would the user need to know. So a lot of user interactions. I used to go and meet them. And also, I would say it's the job needed that, because as you know, when you're leading the project, you have to do the user, collect the requirements. It's all about requirement gathering. So that's how I started. Then I said, this has to be a balance. So for everybody in the team, I would say you have to do a course. For example, if you're doing a costing system, go through what costing system is about, what the end user wants, what is it that's relevant in that. So those aspects, unless you understand what it means, you'll never be able to do a proper automation or digitization of that requirement. So that is, in fact, inventory management, all of that. The books, I used to pick up these books and go through that and understand what it means. Only then you'll be able to appreciate, because I worked on projects across. In fact, there was a complete ERP was those, it was not for some other companies. It is yet to come in the big ERP player. So it was all being developed from scratch. So the ERP systems, so complete financials of what bills receivable, bill payable means. So went through this whole thing, and then that's the balance. Along with technology side, what is coming up, like, those days, the new databases, new capabilities were coming in. So it's a balance you always have to do. Even to this day, I do believe that if you're going to write software for a purpose, it has to be a balance of both. If you're not, then you're not building it for the user. It could just be a technology, fantastic, but it might not meet the end user's requirement. I always believe in that.
Now, the other part is, once you conceptualize something like this, your idea or your design needs to be implemented by others. So how do you address that?
Even this, with the large projects, I would say like this, the idea comes in, it's always a collaborative work. So the teams believe in involving them, at least not the junior most, but, people to get them to understand what it is. It's not just about one person designing it, because everybody needs to, and their ideas need to come in whatever small or big way. So that, and when the buy-in comes in, and then we typically believe in sharing that idea, listening to their ideas. Then, together we do what should be the end solution. So when you actually listen to their ideas, start making them think on what it is, then the buy-in is there. Because it's not just about sharing what is in my mind. The appreciation and the buy-in won't come. What I do is I share what is there, put the end objective, collect their ideas, together we frame. Sometimes I do believe that whatever experience can be, there's always something I can always learn from others, because each individual will bring in something onto the table. So I'd like to hear ideas, bring that in, and then together come to a conclusion, and then we go. So that initial phase of sharing this understanding is very critical, or what the design should be and what is very critical is what I believe. And I typically try to spend as much time in that analysis and design phase rather than before we get into the implementation aspect.
So when do you time out on the analysis? You talk about the analysis paralysis, right? There are so many options nowadays, and with so many ideas, you need to somewhere get on to the next stage, right?
Correct. Typically, I take first the big picture of what is needed. Then you scope it down to what can be done because you can do multiple things, but there's always a time frame that comes into picture, because when you're doing a complete product roadmap, there are so many features that needs to come. So you have to prioritize which would be the most critical core product, phase one, which goes into it. Put it down into the basic core components that are needed, right? Some features which can stand alone and even get into production is what I would typically look at. Then bring in the next pluses. Always, however, keeping in mind that anybody who adopts this or takes it, even put it out for, even if it's a commercial product, when you take it, it has to be something that can easily be upgraded. So keeping those, for example, if it's a database decision, you always would do the database decision first, because you would say which one that is and get from a DB perspective what is needed, from an APIs, what are the critical ones that are needed. And then subsequently keep adding the capabilities in the front end so that it's a plus one. And also, if not very long cycles, keep that in something which can hit the production, and then you keep seeing a plus one. Then you see progress. Because for the team also, it is when it gets into use, there's a lot of motivation. Otherwise, it can get, you don't even know where we are going sometimes if it's too long a cycle. So typically, we do that. And within that, if you look at it exactly in timeframes, let's say if you have about let's say 3 months, an analysis and the complete requirements can go up to even sometimes we do, of course, with Agile, you always do the overlap. But first 3-4 weeks we will spend in what it should be. But prior to that, even the product complete conceptualization would have been done what it should be. Then break it down and take it. I hope it answered your question.
Yes. Of course, there are more questions that get triggered by some of these things, which is your preference generally to use maybe proven patterns or technologies, or would you be more about taking risks and then trying out something new that is not yet proven?
Again, it depends. If there are things which are needed and the time, it all goes on the time frames and the criticality of when we had to go. In those cases, you would prefer to take the proven patterns, especially when you're talking about areas around security, scale. You cannot take a chance. So those you would prefer to take a proven pattern. But at the same time, there's always this, sense where you want to do something different, which others haven't done, right? So always it's a mix, I would say, where you need a firm footing. You cannot, where it, you take the proven path, but if you can take a little risk, I always look at doing something different, bringing in something plus. Because I do remember one of the projects we did, took the opportunity to build a nice rules engine so that we could configure and make that completely configurable rules engine driving. It was all for mathematical calculations. Complex mathematical calculations it is actually for large scale industrial equipment manufacturing companies. So which is a product for them. So it was a good plus while there was a firm footing, but this was some piece where I could play around and, we could get new things. So it's a mix, I would say.
You also mentioned working on product roadmaps or something that is looking into the future and so on.
Yeah.
So when you have a lot of moving parts, or some of these possibly as unknowns, because you don't know how technology is going to evolve or whether it's going to be accepted and things like that. In such cases, to validate your assumptions, you did mention agile approaches, and the other point that you mentioned about the team feeling motivated because they see some progress. How do you kind of carry the team along? Because you're trying something new, maybe it is exciting. Sometimes, of course, the developers have a tendency to say that I don't want to work on something that is quote unquote legacy, or I want to always work on the leading edge stuff.
Right.
To balance that and be prepared to accept that what you're trying out may not be the best one, or you may have to come back and change.
What I have noticed here, right, with the team is willing to learn a lot. They want to experiment. Youngsters especially, they like to experiment. Everybody likes to do something which is new. So in such situations, typically what we do, and always in this, time becomes critical. Time and money. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when we talk about time, it's also the money part. What has worked for me is there is some new parts which have to be done, whatever experimenting. Knowing that it can fail, give them the free hand to say, go, look at, evaluate, come back. But again, with a kind of a time. Maybe, a couple of days. This is what you can do. Come back with it. And then you show a POC, how it works. And these are the criteria with which it needs to do. So you can do a POC and come. And what has also worked is the same challenge, same solution to 2 or 3 people. So they can work parallelly. So they come out, they're looking at, so you do have each one coming out with a different solution and saying which can work and shortlisting. Then we go through that. Then there is always the challenge that, people don't get, they feel, oh, my solution didn't get selected, or it wasn't. To move away from that it has to be, that personal attachment to their solution that they come out. What we do is do a brainstorming after, typically I've done brainstorming after each of these when they present it out, and get everybody's consensus on to which one it is, looking at what works well, putting out a common, essentially requirements in that sense, what criteria is to which it should meet. And then working around that has helped me actually to zero in it. And that basically the learning, every time we do that, the takeaway has been is that it is kind of giving them the agency to go look at it, giving them the free hand to go and trusting them to do a good evaluation. Actually kind of, we can work together to come out with a good solution, and acceptance is there. It can happen. Sometimes it has happened true that, halfway through we have started and then we have seen, oh, the solution doesn't work. Then we had to go back. That is a given when we start something. So we have to be, I think at that point, it's about what I have personally taken away is not holding anybody responsible for that or putting them down for what, it always looking at it as a collective decision that the team did helps a lot. So then the fear of for the people, oh, what if it goes wrong, or that fear won't be there. They'll come out with ideas. It's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. We learn from mistakes. And as a team we failed, if that comes in, it has worked well. And no single person responsibility, but as a team we take the chances, and then if it fails, we'll go back and work.
You talked about some areas like security or scalability where you would rather use some things that are proven and where you can't take risks. Unfortunately, many of those are called non-functional requirements for whatever reason.
Typically, yeah.
But compared to, let's say, a business functionality or what will probably be delivered, how do you communicate the importance of these to the team, or the need for discipline in terms of coding, whether it is defensive programming or just adhering to your APIs and contracts or whatever?
Right. See, while we take the requirements, right? I mean, or when you're conceptualizing even the product, when we are putting it up, the key thing is one of the functional requirements. The other one we always have to focus is on non-functional. Many times, the whole design is driven by the non-functional requirement rather than by the functional requirement. That's been my experience too, because most often the non-functional part of it is forgotten, and then you say, oh, this doesn't scale beyond this numbers. For example, I'll tell you, they could be writing a particular kind of a batch upload or whatever kind of a thing. Now, if it is not well bound to what essentially to process the size, the file sizes can be huge. Now, sometimes it just crashes. Now, if the requirement is, the requirement functionally is, okay, this field has to be validated for this, supporting all of that. But, when the whole file processing doesn't work for huge volumes, it fails. So the design, a well-bound system wherein, even in spite of scale, it should work. That means it has a mechanism built in with the logic itself, that it has its own, batching, internal batching. I'm just giving you an example, internal batching system to read this many and then process it and go back. Then in spite of volumes, it works. So that is the kind of design, reviews or things that I look at to bring into that. So that it's well-bound. I mean, in terms of that reliability is there in the software for any kind of, volumes or even other non-functional things. So that's part of actually the design criteria which we put without configurations also. typically when most people will start hard coding things, very simple things. The thought to make it configurable never comes in. But in product design, it's so important because depending on who takes the product, where it is put, it's always a critical thing for these to become configurable. So, in fact, most functional requirements are easier because the user tells and we can do this. These non-functional ones are ones which nobody tells you. And that is something that, we have to do. That is the actual developers. We'll have to bring into the design. And that's a key thing which I always emphasize on or keep in mind when I'm doing that.
Are there any wow moments or horror stories of complex system that has been tested, everything, we're all quite confident, and then it goes into production, and then what happens?
Well, there are, a couple of stories which very initial, I was still very young and just started off in my career. And there was this big challenge that the authentication module for a credit card, on the issuer side, CVV, right? That had to be written. And in the whole cycle, the whole transaction cycle, if you know in the credit card system where it goes, that whole module had to be, there was like that whole execution of encrypting and decrypting, validating had to be done in a very short time. And then the end-to-end solution, what we had done, had to complete in a fixed time of a few seconds because that's the cycle for authorization. Now, the whole testing was happening. That was one of the wow moments, I would say. But we went through a whole lot of, you asked earlier, right? Revamping of the code only to meet that time. How to make it so optimized code so that it had to finish within that fraction of a second. The whole cycle finishes within that time. So when it actually, and the whole project was hanging on that one thing. If that whole authorization didn't go in that time, the whole project, it would not go live because it didn't meet the criteria. And that was one of the wow moments that I remember, which was, I was very early in the career and I was responsible for writing this modules for authorization. And so it was one of the wow moments. From scalable perspective, I've had quite a few in my career. The transaction and the scalability has always been the main factors when I've worked, whether it's on the supply chain side or on the payment side, because the payment processing engines that I was part of, it has always been very critical aspect. In fact, another wow moment was there was one of these queries that was running. It was running in several hours and it had to be tuned a few minutes. And it was more than 10 plus, more than some 6+ hours, it was really running that query. So finally, I was able to tune it up to something like 18 minutes, which was really one wow moment. It was, it was basically how you write the queries and it was what you do. So those were the wow moments. Then, of course, in one of the companies, there was this migration that happened from one network to ours. We built that capability and we migrated the customer onto ours. And that moment, the transactions volume started and it just got flooded. Okay. And then it was a very critical market. It's in the FMCG market. So, the transactions just started flowing in. And then the system just wouldn't be able to take it. At that point, we had to actually sit down and quickly do, the tuning part of it and then get the transaction to flow. But yeah, every day when the transaction started flowing in, we would find new surprises. And so it took us about a week for that to kind of stabilize. But when I say a week, the days transactions would go. But the next day, again, it didn't get into that normal flow. Okay, it would pick up and then it would crash and then we had to go do something. So it took us a week to get to that optimal numbers or the parameters to be set, so that it became a regular process to get it into a regular rhythm. So quite a few like that, because all the verticals that I've worked in have been quite critical in that sense, and so these a lot of examples. Then these are some of them which come on top of my mind.
Yeah, very nice. So the natural question after that is, after being in this kind of a high pressure, multiple commercial environments, what was the trigger for you to look at the social sector?
To me, I always wanted to do something for the societal sector. It's always been my, I would say, my passion to be part of it. And I was looking at, anything which could be not necessarily IT. I was just looking at options where I could do something in the to especially for women, or education was what I was looking at. Then it happened that when I was talking to my friends, I got introduced into the social sector, and it actually fitted well into what I'm doing, what I have been doing, and with that I can make a difference. So I said, I couldn't have asked for anything better, and that's how I got connected into Shikshalokam.
Yeah, are there any differences in designing for, let's say, a commercial space versus something for the social space?
Not really, because what I am involved in right now in the social sector too, this is for education, and the scale and the end users, similar profiles. Maybe when you talk about commercial, there's only one difference, that when you put it for commercial, you expect that the end user will be trained to handle that. Here you're not. That's the only difference. The end user can be anybody. An end user, you don't expect them to be trained. So what you have to develop is something which is for a diverse set of people. And especially when I'm designing here, when we're doing here, what we do here in Shikshalokam, it actually spreads across the entire nation, which is completely diverse. So that is one of the things, because there you would say, okay, you can train when you're putting out a software for a commercial, train your people to use this, right? Is what I can say. To put it up. Yeah, you have to be very conscious about but there is a certain assumption we can make that they will be able to, that is whoever adopts it will put in that effort to train their end users. But here there is nothing like that. And this looks at that strata of the society which is not exposed to technology, which is very new to technology. That's something which I find different, to be able to cater to. In fact, like for example, we're looking at catering to areas where there is no internet or very weak internet. Then how do you make it such that people still would want to use it, right? Because it's easy that they just throw it away. They'll say, this is not working. If there's no internet, what do you have? But still, how do we make it work for them? The solutions we put out for the time that is there. Maybe they get intermittent connectivity. So, offline, online, all of those come into picture actually. So there are differences in terms of, especially from whom we are catering to. But from if you look at the core part of it, the other things remain the same. And now it is also the pluses of what more can we do to make it easier for people to use. The people who are going to be using come with very little understanding of technology.
Yeah, I was also curious to know about the challenges related to one, possibly language, because if you have to cater to everybody across the country. The other, you already mentioned the connectivity issues, but related to that, also the capability of the endpoint devices. Whereas for a corporate solution, you may assume that it's probably at least a certain configuration. Whereas here, everybody may not have a high-end smartphone.
Yeah.
So how would you take into account
That,
these things? Yeah.
that's also the design, for like when we do that, what we have to consider that it works with a very, for example, the footprint is small, the memory sizes, the devices, and versions also. Actually, the versions are much, they'll be using some version, predated, older version, not expecting to be on the latest version. So we actually consider, so those are the design things that we see. How can the footprint be small so that it can be easily used on some smaller devices? And also language wise, it's always we bring in the compatibility part of it. It has to be the multi-language support is a must. And in fact, now we are also looking at how do we bring in voice enabled interfaces rather than just all the time the keyboard and this one. If we can bring in the voice enabled interfaces for local language support, so with especially with all the AI coming into picture, these are the things that we're looking at, how we can bring in and make it easy for the end user, because it's very hard with a small for them to go type in. Most of the time they might not be. And so those are some things. And when we develop, we are actually looking at compatibility across, for example, browsers, devices. In fact, like for example, we had to get in the compatibility for a particular state because the users were mostly on iPhone. Originally, I mean, ideally, it's all of Android, very popular, and that is the most common thing. But we had to then bring in iPhone interface because one of the states, the users were more on iPhones than on Android. So we do take these into consideration while we're designing. So that's a constant thing. When we test also, we just test for the compatibility across devices, different versions of Android, versions of iPhone, and then we, iOS, and then put that up. So it is a lot of, so even a release it is quite a effort that goes in. So even if it's social sector, but the whole life cycle is no different in that sense. The rigor, and in fact, we would need much more because we don't have clear definitions or on who would be using this or what we can set that. You have to cover the coverage on making it compatible, testing and ensure that it works from a quality perspective. It's higher.
On similar lines, normally, if it is a commercial product, we talked about whether it is pirate metrics or the growth metrics and so on. Whereas in any solutions for the society, you look at the impact or the outcomes you are able to create.
Yeah.
So from being product-led as a solution, are there any metrics or any tips that you have in terms of how one can build those things in to see how effective we have been?
See, those actually, when these, especially, we are doing open source. All our capabilities are built open source. For us, the clear metrics from a tech perspective is how many adopters we have, how many, who would like to take it, and what's the feedback from them that we're getting, what are the improvements, and we take the improvements. So that is a measure of how their products are, okay, from a listing perspective, because building the adopter community and then the contributor community is the key measure for us in terms of from the software point of view. That is a clear listing. From other capabilities that we build in, that has each one of them have a different metrics on how we would measure the impact programmatically, how we put that out, and how it is done, and how we measure the impact around that. But if you're looking only from a software perspective, if it was there, it's the bottom line is the money, the impact you'll see is from the revenue. Here it's for us, it's adopters will take our code, use it, and that's the clear metrics for us.
Yeah, I didn't realize how long we've been talking. Uh, I usually like to ask some career tips before we close for two segments of people. One, those who are considering a career in IT, and those who are what we may call as a midlife career or mid-career crisis. Now, should I continue doing whatever I'm doing or should I change? In which case, from the context of contributing to the social sector and IT, do you think this is a good career for people who are starting their careers or people who have some experience who would like to switch to this? And
It's for both. Honestly, it's for both. See, but reality, if you're looking only from a software perspective, what I would like to say is the challenge in whether you're working for a corporate or in social sector, the work-wise, there's no difference. In fact, the quality of work that we are doing, even in the social sector, it's huge. It's equivalent. The complexity of the products, sometimes it's even more complex. Honestly, I have seen that because you build it for, you're building it for scale, most of the products. And then you're working with, especially when you're working with open source communities, you're working with others. The other challenges are, or rather, the whole way you work is very different. It is not about building something with a license piece. It works and you can sell this or not sell that aspect. But here you're making it a piece which can have an impact, right? As I said, it's about how many people can get benefited, where it can go and fit in. Even if you're developing some small component, or a capability or let's say a simple microservice, the aspects are how you could plug it into many platforms. Thereby, you're improving the turnaround time. The benefits are high. You're not reinventing the code. So that's how you measure it. So it's a very good. The challenge is there. So it is fine even for us, fresher. The challenge is in fact it's equivalent to what you see in a startup because you get involved right from scratch into all aspects of product development. You get the time. In fact, you get the time and you can, to go through and learn a lot of things. So that's always, so for both, it's the same. And only thing is, if people think that, I'll move to social sector, it's much easier there. That is something I wouldn't agree to. Because, to me, it is not about taking it easy. It's the same commitment. For me, it hasn't been different when I have been in a corporate. I've also been part of a startup where, I had to do everything from scratch. And now I'm part of social sector, but nowhere, the commitment levels or, the responsibility wise, it is no different. I think it's very important for everybody to think to see it. It's just the same. It's just that, in fact, it's very gratifying. To me, it has been a very gratifying piece because it is, it is what you do is helping, for a lot of people, and somewhere you're able to make a difference. That's what it has been. This is my personal point. But never to think that your commitments can never be less or take it easy. Yeah. But one thing I'll definitely say, the passion, irrespective of whether you work in whichever sector, right? I think most important, if you ask me about career advice, so I tell everybody, do your job, whatever you do it well, excel in what you do. The rest of it just falls into place. Because that is what I have been doing all my life. Whatever I take up, there's nothing great, nothing less. Everything is good. As long as you're learning, sometimes you learn, it's new. Sometimes you apply what you learn. Both are equal. Both are important because you also have to apply what you learn at times because for the benefit of the larger frame of things, it'll help. That's how you always give back. And we're given in corporate sector. So it's always this cycle of learning, applying what you learn, learning new. So there's nothing like, you know, any job which is, oh, not up to the mark and this is better, that is better. No, I have never seen it like that. So whatever project came by, whatever work was given, I always have done it with commitment and passion and to excel in what you do. Other things fall into place. In fact, that's how it has been in my, I would say, all my career. Never worked to say, okay, I have to, prove myself to say that what I do well. What happens after that, with no expectation. So it just works.
Yeah. Thanks. On that wonderful note, I think we just about have that much time to say thank you. Thanks for taking the time, sharing your story. It's been quite insightful in terms of both what goes in building complex systems as well as particularly the shift to make a difference in society.
Thank you, Shiv. Thank
Thanks.
you so much.
Yeah.
And once again, a heartfelt thanks for the opportunity. I do hope even if one person gets benefited from this, it's very gratifying for me. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.